Hello, and thank you for joining us today here at the Bramble Patch. My name is Wendy, and on Technicals today we have Alicia. I'd just like to say a big thank you to the emails that we've been receiving and the thank you notes. It's very much appreciated, and it's really nice to know that you're actually using the tutorials and enjoying them. Today we're going to be looking at something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at embellishment. So we're going to be doing tucks and pleats. These can be used in patchwork. They can also be used in dressmaking or in soft furnishings. You can see here, I've made a cushion. I had some surplus fabric left over from the quilt I made last week. So I made myself a little cushion to actually go with the quilt. I really like it. I really enjoyed doing it. So let's take a look at the different types of things you can do. There's lots and lots of possibilities, and I haven't had time to actually do all of them. So this actually is to inspire you and to encourage you to play and explore what you can do with this technique. So first of all, I've got a few little samples I've done here. So this is done out of two contrasting fabrics. And this is just done with a single twist through it. So it's stitched at the top and the bottom with no other stitching in the middle. So that's just a really simple one. And that one actually looks really, really nice used on the bag. My daughter Claire made her bag for her daughter Phoebe. And it's really effective. So the more contrasting fabrics you use, in my opinion, the better the effect. They look really, really good. So apart from using it for the front of a bag, it could also be used for a pocket that went right across the front of the bag. And also because it bows out a little bit, it means you've got extra space and it will expand. So that's another bonus if you actually put it into a bag. It can be used in patchwork. If you're putting this in patchwork, you won't be putting this quilt through a long arm unless it's going to be custom quilted, because of manipulating the fabric, it would get trapped and actually sewn in position. So there's probably not a lot of use if you're going to be doing it that way. They look brilliant on cornerstones. If it's something that you're going to quilt it yourself, then that would, really add interest to it. And absolutely perfect for wall hangings, or something that you want to add texture on. If you want to do landscapes, these tucks and pleats look really, really good. So that's the first one that I showed you that is good, particularly for a bag. This one is a really, really simple one. And this, you've got the top and the bottom, the actual pleats stitched one way, with then a row of stitching going down in the opposite direction to give you that lovely rippled effect, which again, that would look brilliant if you wanted to put it into a landscape wall hanging and have the effect of ripples on water. So that's another one you can do. This is the same technique as I've done in the pillow, in the cushion rather. Again, a nice technique. This one is one I've just stitched at the top. So it gives the effect of a bit like a godet skirt, to be honest. And on this one, when I've done this one, I've actually top stitched the edge as well to give it extra structure. And that actually is really pretty. Once you've done it, obviously you get a slightly different shape, but you can just square that up and make it into a square for a cornerstone, for instance. So that's really nice. So if you wanted to actually make the cushion design here that I've got, when I do something like that, I like to have the actual edges done a lot wider. I think I cut those originally 6 inches. I like to cut them larger and then cut them back. You then have the option to make it the size you want. On that one, obviously, I've used 2 different fabrics. I've got a background fabric, which is the peachy colour, and the coral for the little twist. Now on that one, I've used the background fabric strips are 2 inches and the coral is 1 inch because I didn't want it to look too heavy. But you can use what size strips you want. But the layout remains the same if you want to piece anything. So you would have your wider piece to the edge, then you would do your contrasting fabric, then background, contrast, background, all the way through until you get to the other end where you'll actually put your wider strip on. Now, the height that you're going to work with is the height it remains. So do remember to include your seam allowance in that. So if you want it to finish up 10 inches, then you need to be cutting it 10.5. The width of it, depending on what width strips you have, is going to be considerably less, possibly even only just over half of the width that you originally start with. But that is something that you would have to calculate depending on how you pleat it and the width of your strips to start with. So that is the layout that you will be doing if you're going to be looking at doing contrasting fabrics. So I'm just going to pass this to Alicia. Thank you, Alicia. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look at something if we want to use a plain fabric. So when I say plain fabric, one piece of fabric. So if I just turn my board over, and I've just got a piece of fabric here. So what we're going to do is work out how we mark everything. So this is just a piece that I've used as a sample, okay? First of all, I'm just going to flip back to this one. So this is the one with the twist to it, okay? Now, this is the one I've used on this one, 2-inch strips to start with. So once they've been seamed, my strips become 1.5 inches. So if you're doing this one, all you need to do is work on one edge at a time. And this is the one with a single twist to it. We've got no sewing down the middle. So with this one, what we're going to do is mark halfway down on what I'm calling the background fabric. The reason I'm calling it as the background fabric is because this is the fabric I've used for my edge strips, the wider strips at the edge. So that's what I'm calling my background. So what I'm doing is actually marking at the 3/4 inch mark between the two mustard colours. So here, as you can see, all of these have been marked. So on one edge, we're going to mark the dark strips. On the opposite edge, we mark in the opposite strip. So where is it the background on one edge, it's the contrasting fabric on the other that we're actually marking halfway between. So because this is 1.5 inches, it's at the 3/4 inch mark. And all you need to do is, like I say, it's best just to work on one edge at a time. So all you need to do is, once you've done it, I like to go along and pin this before I take it to the sewing machine. So here we are, and all I'm going to do is take the edge of this. Now on here, I've top stitch along here to give it a little bit more structure. You don't have to. If you want that softer look, then don't. It doesn't make any difference. But on this particular one, I want it to. So all I'm doing is taking the edge that has the top stitching on it and taking it to the 3/4 inch pin and actually pinning that in position, like so. Now, because everything is already pinned, all you've got to do is just keep pleating it over and pinning it in position. Because once these are all pinned, you can just take it to your machine and just sew straight the way down, knowing that nothing's going to get caught where it shouldn't, basically. So just pop those ones in there, like so. Now, as you can see, it basically looks as though you've got one piece of dark fabric going, oops, all the way down. So that now is actually ready to sew, but I'm not going to sew that because if I do that, I won't get time to finish the other part that I want to go through with you. So once you've done that, you will turn your work around, and then because you will put your pin in all of every other strip, so this time it's the contrasting strip, halfway along, so 3/4 inch on in this occasion, and I'm just going to take that over and pin that in position like so. And take this one over, pin it. And just by me pinning it, you will see how it gives you that lovely twist effect. And I actually really like this on a bag. I think it makes brilliant pockets for bags. I've made several bags where I've done this and actually put a zip on the top of it, because it just gives you that extra little bit of fullness. You can still line it, just allow your lining, put some pleats in your lining, so it still means that that pocket can bag out as you do it. And as you can see, that actually gives a really, really lovely effect, like so. And if I was to put my hand there, you'll see it just opens up like that. Really, really nice. So that's the effect of that one. So moving on to the next one we're going to do, we're now going to mark this one. Now this is just a small piece of fabric because it's easier for me to be able to show you actually on camera. So here we are. So all I'm going to do, there's different ways of marking this. And what I'm going to do is place this on my cutting board, okay? So again, I like to give myself a little bit extra allowance on the edge. This one, I'm actually going to mark at 1 inch intervals. So on the edge, I'm going to give myself 2 inches, just so I've got enough wiggle room, because I've allowed enough for it to be cut back. So there's different ways of doing this. You need a fabric marker. So if you're using a fabric marker, I've got a water erasable one that I'm using today. I particularly like this one because it just comes out and the colour doesn't return. I would suggest you don't use a heat removable one, because if you choose to give this a press halfway through, you're going to lose all your markings, so you've wasted your time. You can just use a chalk one if you want to. So firstly, the one way that we can do it, I'm just going to put a 2 inch marker on the edge of my fabric, and I'm going to mark the top and the bottom at the same time. And you can see that this one, comes out a turquoise colour. So all I'm going to do now is take my ruler and put the inch marker on my turquoise mark and mark it as I go along, like so. And this way I'm doing top and bottom at the same time. So that's one way of doing it. If you're doing a piece, using a piece of fabric that's much wider and you don't have a long enough ruler, obviously the idea of doing this is to do both edges at the same time. But what you can do is use your cutting board, which has got your markings on already. And if you're going to be using an increment of 1 inch or 2 inches, then you can actually use your board. So all you would do is place your fabric to make sure it's running in line with one of the markings, and literally use your board and just mark all the way along as you go, making sure you leave yourself a wider gap at the end. And on here as well, it really doesn't take very long. You can just whiz along and actually get that done. So there we go. So once we've done that, what we want to do now is actually form the pleats. Now, as you see, we've got one piece of fabric, but this actually becomes very, very effective. So I'm just going to stitch a couple of rows for you, just so you get the idea of how to construct it. And I've already prepared another block that we can be working with. So we'll take this to the sewing machine. Now, I don't actually press this. If you want to, then do so. But all you need to do is take your piece of fabric and because you've marked the top and the bottom at the same interval, just fold it on those lines like so. And we're going to take this to the sewing machine and start sewing. Now on my sewing machine already, I've already got a thread saver in place under my sewing machine foot. So thread saver, or a donkey, whichever way you want to call it. And apart from it actually easing the fabric through and saving us thread, it also is going to give us an indicator and a marker from which end we want to sew. Because doing this, it doesn't matter whether you're actually doing this one with one piece of fabric and actually building the pleats into it, or whether you are going to be constructing it like this one and actually strip piecing. Remember that when you do this, you always want to sew top to bottom and bottom to top, all the way down, just like you would if you was going to do a Bargello quilt. Because if you choose to sew from the top same way down every time, your work will bend one way, known as bananaing. And the longer the strips, the more it does it. So always make sure you sew A to B and then B to C. So you're going up and down all the way. So I've got my thread saver on already. I'm just going to sew off of my thread saver. I'm putting the edge of my foot on the edge of my fabric, and I'm just sewing. Now, I'm using a 1/4 inch foot. Most machines have a foot with it that actually does that. If not, you can use a foot that you can actually move the needle over to achieve the width you want. If your machine doesn't move the needle and your foot is quite wide, then instead of doing your markings at 1 inch intervals, then take them to 1 1/4 or 1 1/2, and it'll just accommodate that extra wide width that you're going to be putting into it. Now, I have sewn all the way down this. Now, as I said, I already had a donkey on my sewing machine. So because that was at the top, I know I now need to sew from this end down towards it. So all I'm going to do now is once again crease my fabric, and I'm going to sew down. Again, I'm sewing off of the donkey that I've already got on my sewing machine, straight onto my fabric. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit and take it all the way down to the bottom. And approaching the bottom edge, I'm just going to knit that last thread saver off, straight the way down to the bottom and onto my thread saver. And I'll do one more pleat. So because I've come off of there, I'm now going to sew from that end back the other way again. Because this way, it means there'll be no misshaping going on. And that's what we're aiming to achieve. So I've just got the edge of my foot on there. I'll nip that one off. So straight onto it. And nip that one off. Now, I'm not going to go all the way along this because I have actually prepared a piece that we can be working with. I'll just take that donkey off. Now, as you can see, we've already got these really nice pleats starting to form, like so. So what I would do, I'd go all the way along here, putting these pleats on, and then press it. Now, when you press it, make sure you're pulling it out so that you're maximizing the width of it all the way along. Once that's done, what I like to do is actually border it. Now, if you're going to do a cushion, you may choose not to put anything on the top, which is fine. Or if you want to do an ordinary border side, top, bottom, that would be the way to do it. Or if you want to miter the corners, then actually put that into it. But make sure you give this a good press. And if this, once you've pressed it and stretched it, if it measures 10 inches, then cut your sides 10 inches and then the width of the top to accommodate your the width of it plus it. You don't want to make it too big because we want it to fit nicely. And then, like I say, just make sure that everything's pressed. And I press it on the wrong side as well, just to make sure that everything's nice and fresh. So I've got one here that I prepared earlier. And I chose to actually miter my corners. because I do like them mited. And this will eventually finish up as a little cushion. So here we are with this now. And what we want to do is actually pleat this inner. And I'm going to do the same design that I've done on that cushion because I particularly like that one. So what we want to do to start with is actually, we can measure it. If we measure the width of this, now if it's a nice easy number like 9, then we can work out that we want our lines at 3 inches. If it's a little bit of a more unusual width, then what we can do is not quite centralize anything. So all we need to do is make sure that the line on the left-hand side is inset the same distance as the one on the right-hand side, and then we can take the middle measurement. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to put a measurement of 2 inches. Now, again, I'm using this water erasable pen. So I'm putting my 2-inch marker on my sewn line, like so, and I'm just going to draw straight the way down. I'm only drawing on my pleated area. I'm not putting lines on my borders at all. And I'm just going to flip that round, and I'm going to do the same marking on the other side. So I know that those are equal, like so. Now, it's up to you whether you want to put your third marking on now or later. I'm going to put it on now. So if I measure the width that I've got here, make sure it's nice and even. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to do that 2 1/8. That works for me. And I'm just checking that I've got the horizontals and the verticals all level. And I'll go straight up like so. Now I'm going to sew the first, the 2 lines at the sides to start with. So I don't pin, but you may prefer to. So all I'm going to do is take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to insert the needle right into the seam that's joined the border to the main piece. And I'm going to put my needle straight in there and do a locking stitch if your sewing machine has it, or you can actually just do a little reverse stitch. And once I've done that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to flip these pleats over as we go along, all the way down. Like I say, to start with, the first one, you may choose to actually pin them all, but just see what makes you feel more comfortable. What I would suggest is take the speed of your sewing machine down. I'm going to take that off, actually. Like so. Raise my needle. Okay, so to start with, what I'm going to do is I'm lowering my needle into the seam, and I'm putting my locking stitch on there. And at this point, pull the first pleat back towards you, because if you do need to do forward and backwards to actually lock that first stitch in, we don't want to actually catch the first pleat facing the wrong way. So just pull that back towards you, and you can pull another couple of pleats towards you at the same time if you're comfortable to do so. And then all you're going to do is just sew. And then every few minutes, well, a few seconds, because it doesn't take minutes, is just pull those pleats towards you, sew a few more, and keep going. And you can see where you're going because you've got these lovely lines that you've already put on. And because this is a water erasable pen, all I've got to do is just spray it. To be honest, if I actually just press this with a steam iron, the marks will just remove. but this pen obviously is turquoise, so if you're working with turquoise fabric, this is probably not the pen to be using. Luckily, I've got a white one and a dark one of these as well. But this is my favourite one. I'm just pulling these over towards me, and I'm nearly at the end of the first row. So as you can see, this actually works really, really well, and it's very, very quick. Just going to push that one in, and I'm going to do a locking stitch there. If you haven't got your locking stitch, then you can just do a little reverse stitch if you want to, like so. So I'm going to remove that from my machine, and I will show you the effect of the first row that we've actually done. So that's the effect we've already started to achieve just by doing one row of stitching. So now I'm actually going to do the other side. I like to do the side and then the middle. So I'm just going to take this back to my sewing machine. Once again, I'm lowering my needle into the seam that joins my border to my block in the center, locking stitch, and off we go again. I think the texture of these, children actually, my grandchildren particularly like these, Claire's children, love these textured cushions that she's made. She's made quite a lot of these. I love to use these in wall hangings, and particularly on landscapes and seascapes. It's fun. And certainly adds a lot of interest to a piece of work. So just pleating those down as I go. Even if you want to pin this, to be honest, it doesn't take very long. And if you've had a little bit of a wobble where one of your pleats is not quite the right width, it's really not the end of the world. Because of the way they twist, it really is very forgiving. And sometimes in patchwork, we like forgiving things. Just stitch something down there. Lock and stitch on there. Or, like I say, if you want to do a little reverse, you can. Okay. So that is the second row of stitching we've now put in place. Just get that off there. And you can see how good that is already starting to look. So all we're going to do now, because this is actually already done this, all we're going to do now is sew the middle one in the opposite direction. And you've already got your line on there. So this is so simple. This one, you've not really got to do any manipulating at all. So we'll just take that straight back to the sewing machine. And needle into the seam. If I just grab that edge in there, like so. Oops. So I've just done the locking stitch there, and I'm just going to sew straight the way down that row. I'm not going to flip anything, turn anything, hold anything, just straight the way down there. Just going to go to the edge there, locking stitch, or reverse, whichever you want. And that gives us this lovely effect. And if you want to make cushions, you can actually use different materials. So even velvets and everything work with this. So I think you can see we've got a really lovely effect there. Now that is ready to be used for the front of a cushion. I won't quilt this. If I wanted to do anything on the borders, I could do. But I think the simplicity of that is actually what works and makes it really effective. So thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you again very soon. Bye-bye for now.